Hello and welcome to Manibil. This is a new attempt at presenting my idea of metaphysics. And it might need a few explanations before I get going, and you're being dumped directly into it here, right? But it's there are a few things that I might give a few thoughts before I head into doing it sort of more systematically or philosophically, you could say, right? Now, one thing is that when you're working from your everyday, right, there's all sorts of stuff going on that you're sort of used to, right? Your car, your bicycle, the trees outside, your mommy, your children, your food, whatever, refrigerator, and your thoughts and your emotions, and it's sort of, when you just sort of look at it, it's just some cloud of all sorts of stuff going on, you could say, right? Just to keep it short, right? No need to further, you know what I mean, right? And in many cases, when I listen to people talking about these aspects of this philosophy, it's like they keep it in this kind of cloud of ideas and emotions and feelings and colors and concepts and everything, and they sort of cherry pick whatever they need in the moment and start sort of arguing from that. I don't think that's a good approach to philosophy. In fact, I would say it's a very bad and dysfunctional way of doing philosophy, and it's inevitably going to lead to some kind of confirmation bias, right? Where you bring in the things you need to get to your preconceived conclusions, and you're leaving out something that doesn't really fit the picture, right? I want to account for everything. Everything. And at the same time, I want to find out if there's actually a structure to it. Are some of these aspects depending on some other aspects, right? And I wanted to, as far as I can get it, to present this structure. And does it it's like, if I want to drive somewhere, I won't just buy some gasoline and thinking I'm going to drive somewhere and get there and then get the car, right? I need the car to put the gasoline in it in order to go where I want to go. So there are things I can't do without, a certain structure. One thing follows the other and so on, right? This kind of mentality. And that leads to another question, obviously, which is, okay, where do I start then? Can I find some starting point and then add the structure to it afterwards, right? And the only approach that I have been able to come up with, and you might, call it various names and find some slightly different avenue on whatever, right? The approach I have found to be the best is defining stuff. When I have sort of, okay, bicycle, just grab whatever you want. There's nothing that you can't grab from this big bag of everything, right? Grab something and start defining it, right? And defining it, and when you have found that definition, you're using words to define it, terms, whatever you want to call it, and then define that term. And the terms you're using to do that, define those terms, and keep going and keep going and keep going, right? And what I've come up with, or what I have realized, is when you do that exercise, what you always end up with are the qualia. It's the color, and it's a sound, and it's a smell, and it's a feel, and it's a taste. No matter how I do it, I always end up there, right? No matter what I talk about, right? Why do I have this emotion? Well, I had the emotion because I was experiencing something that was falling on top of something, some person. But what was that? Well, that was the thing and a person. Okay, so the thing, how did I know about that thing? Because I had an experience, which was a color or a sound. You can trace it always when you define. And what I've also realized is when I get to either color or sound or smell or feel or taste, I can't go any further without, and I'm being careful and that I'm not, using some kind of circular argument or some kind of tautology or something like that, right? Or begging the question or anything like that, right? No fallacies here, right? So when I have, for instance, a color, yellow, okay, how do I define yellow? Well, I can't. I can't define it any further. There might be somebody say, well, it's a wavelength and so on. How did you get to that wavelength? Well, I had this instrument. Okay, that's an object. Okay, that's something that, how did you get to that object? Well, I had an experience and I had a color and a sound. Okay, so you're begging the question. You're making a circular argument, right? You can't define colors any further. It's simply when you get to yellow, for instance, or, brown or whatever, you can't go any deeper. And the same goes, and you could do it for yourself. You can check it out for yourself with sounds and smells and feels and tastes, right? And feel, I mean, when I touch something, you could maybe call it touch rather than feel. Maybe touch is actually a better word because feelings are something else that also goes on sometimes. That might be, park that term in that category and then call it touch rather than feel. Maybe that would be an improvement of my presentation here, right? And that's why I would say, and please do this exercise and tell me if there's some holes in it, right? Please let me know. Please let me know, right? Okay, that's what I call qualia. A color, a sound, a smell, a feel, or a taste, that's a qualia. And because I can't define it any further, it must be what I would call a reduction base. And you could say what I just did doing this definition exercise is some kind of reduction where I where does it all lead back to, right? What does it all go back to? It goes back to color, sound, smell, feel, and taste. So I have reduced everything into these 5 constituents, or at least one of those 5 constituents, right? And I can't go any further because I can't define them without using something that I've already discarded in my reduction. And that's not allowed in my reduction. So you could say it's sort of meta-philosophy here, right? I have some rules for what I can't reduce something, remove it from the picture, say I have to go deeper, and then bring it back into a definition of something that is deeper. That doesn't work. It's the old problem of standing in the bucket and try to raise yourself up. You can't do that, right? So you can't bring in something that you have discarded or, reduced from and bring that back into the reduction, right? So that's illegal in this exercise, in my opinion, right? Okay, so fair and square, my reduction base is colors, sounds, smells, feels / touch, and taste, right? But that's not all, right? In fact, it doesn't really give me much to talk about colors, sound, smell, feel, and taste because there are other stuff going on, right? I could be experiencing elephant also, right? And how does that fit with the picture, right? Well, in my opinion, there is another level. The first level is the qualia, right? This is the reduction base. This is the screen of perception, as some people call it, right? This is the theater screen, so to say, the Cartesian theater, whatever, right? Something like that, at least, right? The second level is there are cognitions going on, which is a part of this inner goings on that, in my opinion, places objectifications or cognitions on the screen of perception among the qualia, right? It's like if you're experiencing elephant, it's my mind. I'm hesitating to use the term mind, but let's just say, right? It's my mind that which I need to use the term, right? Or maybe let's say consciousness rather, right? My consciousness attaches elephant to the screen, right? It's not arriving from the screen or from behind the screen and places itself on the screen. It is my consciousness that slaps it onto, basically, in a metaphorical sense, right? On the thing, right? It might be so quick and dirty that it feels like it's arriving from the outside. But I would say elephant or tomato or human being or river or arm, and you can go on. There are thousands upon thousands of, these cognitions, right? And sub-cognitions where, for instance, as I wrote here, arm is a sub-cognition of a human being, for instance, or it might be maybe not an elephant, but you could say maybe a monkey or something like that, right? Arm is a sub-concept or cognition of monkey, right? These cognitions seems to go on without me deciding whatever I want to. I can't cognize whatever I want to cognize, though I can tap into the ideas of the cognitions, you could say, right? It's sort of, we are going into Humean territory here, right? When I can tap into the concept elephant, but it's not the cognition elephant, right? And it's also, Platonic and Plato's, the cave and, what's the real world and what's the forms and so on, right? If I tap into elephant, I can think of an elephant. It's almost like I can, put it on my screen of perception, but it's sort of faint. It's sort of ghostly, you could say, right? I'm also hesitating to use that term, and I'm careful trying to choose some good terms here, right? I can think of elephant, I can think of tomato, I can even sort of imagine the colors without seeing the colors, right? So that's also why I think that these cognitions are based on concepts that are form-fitted to the qualia, the screen of the qualia, and the qualia then becomes the lively version, the vivacity, the strong vivacity, as Hume would call it, right? So the elephant is a concept I already have that is used to identify elephant in my screen of perception or my qualia, right? And there's a whole host of these, and there might be, we could go into long discussions on what it entails to be a cognition and what doesn't, right? Because there are all aspects that are also usually called concepts. It's basically, always, or maybe not always, but oftentimes and usually people are, if it's not qualia, people tend to call it concepts, right? Well, it's a concept. Evolution is a concept, right? Geometry is a concept. Elephant is a concept. Music is a concept. Concept is added to all these. I would like for concepts to be the foundation for cognition and nothing else. We have to find other words to the other stuff, right? Okay, so all these cognitions going on is beyond my control. I'm not controlling whether or not I have the lively the lively version of the concept in my qualia, though I can still tap into the idea of elephant. And maybe that's because I need some time to reason and do things like that. And that's the reason why I can tap into it without actually, experience it, right? And in order to keep experiencing the same object, possibly, right? And this is sort of, maybe I'm cycling a bit, that there needs to be something that is unchangeable, which is the concept. In order to, the concept is there because there's apparently some rigidity to the experience that makes it advantageous for me to sometime later identify the same concept without me being able to tell you why, right? That's why the concept is there. So if experience whatever, again, the mind might add this concept to it, right? In some cases, my mind or my consciousness adds a concept to the experience, which is quickly changed again. Or sometimes it take a longer time, but sometimes it I wouldn't say it does it wrongly, because I can know whether or not it should or shouldn't do this, right? So you are possibly been in a situation where you thought you saw something, and then you looked closer, and then I realized, no, it's not an elephant, or it's just fake elephant, something like that, right? Though you're still experiencing the concept elephant, but it's sort of a variation of elephant that is not the kind of elephant you thought it was. So these sort of gray areas, and of course they're there, right? Okay. Now, at the second level, at the same level as the cognitions, there are other things going on. And I haven't sort of put labels on all that could possibly also be sort of second level derivatives, you could call it, right? All these derivatives are derived from the qualia. Those other things could be something like music. I don't find music to be a concept in the same fashion as a tomato or elephant, right? But there's still something going on that at least stirs some emotions in me when I like music very much, right? And maybe you could say the same for art. I mean, in this sense, more like, paintings or something like that, maybe movies or, whatever, right? Something that is more visual than audio, right? Music. So this is sort of a special case where I don't need to hear music in order to survive, but I might need to cognize tomatoes and rivers and human beings in order to survive, right? But I don't need music, I don't need art. It's sort of an extra benefit at the second level derivative, right? And there may be more there that needs to be plugged in, but that was sort of what I could come up with, right? I find this to be a description of the second level, right? Now I might call this the first level derivative, but I like to call the first derivative the qualia, or the screen of perception, because there might be something beyond that qualia that I do not have access to, right? I might get back to that. The third level is, okay, can I derive something from these derivatives, right? The elephant, can I derive something? There are geometric shapes, right? There is something that is sort of elongated, something that is more roundish, and there's a stick or a line, or stuff that I can derive on a third level of derivative. Tomato is sort of roundish, right? Human being is ovalish with a circle up here and 4 sticks, right? If you're male, you have 5 sticks, right? And you can sort of, if you have more than one elephant, you have 10 elephants, you could start to talk about numbers, right? And if 2 of these elephants disappear, you could say, well, I had 10 elephants, now 2 disappeared. How many are there? Well, it would be 10 minus 2, which is 8. So now we're doing mathematics, right? So these kinds of abstractions, as I call them, geometry, mathematics, numbers, these are arriving because of cognitions. I wouldn't have geometry, mathematics, or numbers if I didn't have any cognitions, right? And there are all stuff going on in my consciousness, which is what I call categories, which is sort of fauna. It could be, what's a fauna? Animals, right? Isn't it? Or is it? I always confuse these. No, that's flora, right? Flora is plants and fauna is animals, right? Yes, it's sort of, fauna is an artificial category that is derived from the observation of their elephants and their rhinos, and they might be sort of the same kind of animal, but they're different, right? They're different concepts, but they have so many similarities that we might create a category called fauna that's bigger than elephants. But it's all these things that seem to eat shit, eat stuff, and walk around and eat each other and so on, and can move and so on, right? Fauna. Or Europe, for instance, right? That's sort of Europe might even be an even lower level or higher level, you could say, but lower level derivative than the third level. But as we go lower and lower into these levels, it gets harder for me to pinpoint exactly where they need to fit in. So there might be something that have to be moved around a bit, maybe, right? But I would say that the qualia is the 5 senses, so to say, right? And I can't find any other things to put in a second level than cognitions and some other stuff like music and art, right? Okay. And art is also, art might need to go from this list or from the second level, right? Maybe go into abstractions like on the third level. Because, and maybe even fourth level, right? Because I need some geometry in order to appreciate abstract art, for instance, right? I might need to have an idea of father, for instance, in the categories down here, right? In order to understand art or, logic, whatever, right? So art maybe have to go to the third or fourth level. It's just, brainstorming this, right? Okay. And as I said, these categories are artificial labels attached to a group of cognitions, right? Father is a certain kind of human being that does this and that and the other. It's purely artificial. It's a purely a construct, a category, an artificial label that is created by human consciousness. And, this is one of these kinds, right? You're not experiencing father. It's a label that is put on, right? And the third layer is methods. And I was looking for some better word than methods, but I'm sort of, I was considering using the term principle, but I find that to be more like morality than what I'm referring to here, which is science and logic, and there may be other stuff, right? But science is a method of doing stuff in order to get to the fourth level, which is sort of theories and laws, right? Now, there might be a lot more to put in the fourth level. This is sort of a rough kind of draft where I don't want to spend, months and months trying to get every single piece correctly, but I want to get to a particular kind of idea of a structure of my metaphysics, right? That there's nothing going on in, for instance, the third level that can be referred to in the second level. And there's nothing in the second level that can be referred to in the first level, right? If you're doing the qualia, you can't talk about elephants, right? You can't talk about arms, you can't talk about music. Then you're doing qualia, and the only thing you can refer to are colors and sounds and smells and feels and tastes, right? And if you're just talking about something else, then you're jumping into the second level. And then you have to, from that second level, you have to refer to how that second level thing refers to the first level thing, like a color, a sound, a smell, a taste, and so on, right? Everything in the second level has to refer directly to something in the first level. And the same goes for the third level. It has to refer directly to something in the excuse me, I'm screwing around. The third level have to be defined by something in the second level. And the second level is at the same time defined by something in the first level. And that is the ground floor of definition. The colors that I couldn't define any further, right? So you see this structure that sort of you can't just jump into this, that, and the other when you're doing philosophy. If you're talking about the first level stuff, you can't talk about the second, third, or fourth, or whatever level other stuff, right? Because then you're mixing things together that doesn't fit. And that's the structure I've come up with. At least that's just, pull out of my ass, anything like that. I feel that I'm argued pretty well for it here, right? And could possibly be better argued. There might be a second version of this presentation that might add a few aspects and a few clarifications and so on, right? Okay, so I hope it makes sense to you, at least, right? At least this is sort of an approach to doing metaphysics, right? I can't just bring in something because I feel I need to, right? I can't just, but I think there should be leprechauns, so I'm just saying there are also leprechauns, right? Because you're losing contact with something you can directly access, and the only thing that you can directly access or refer to, in my opinion, in the end, are the qualia. The colors, the sound, the smell, and feel and taste, because that's the reduction base. That's where everything starts in your thinking, right? Or at least in my thinking, you could say, right? You don't have to follow this, you don't have to agree with me, fine. So, then maybe then we can find common ground on later levels of philosophy, right? I might point out also that, as I've listed here, there are other things going on. These experiences in consciousness are kept in memory, right? You can have a memory of an experience of, you were in a situation with particular persons and a car and a bridge and a fish and a pizza, whatever, right? It's locked in the memory, or it's put in the memory, and that's where it's kept, right? And memories can potentially arrive from anything, but there might be limitation of what can be a part of memory, right? But it could be complicated, this. But I'm just trying to point out there are other things going on than what I presented in the first slide, right? Memory, for instance. Feelings can basically arrive from potentially, theoretically, in my opinion, from any part of this, right? When you see a particular color, you could have a feeling or an emotion or whatever you want to call it, right? A sound. When you hear that sound, the sound of that bell that reminded of you, whatever, right? That taste of that particular pizza or that whatever, right? And it's can also be that when you see an elephant, you have another emotion, right? Or a saber-toothed tiger or a river. You can also have, the further you go down the levels of derivatives here, it may be harder and harder and harder to get an emotion. When you talk about evolution, do you get an emotion? It might be because you're wedded to the idea, or you're not wedded to the idea. If you're sort of a fundamentalist Christian, you feel your mommy hating you for talking about evolution, so that might trigger some kind of whatever, right? But it's not that kind of emotion I might be going for in this case. It's rather that it's a sort of direct connection with, it's because of the particular qualia that you get the particular emotion. But you could expand it maybe, right? But it could, in principle, be any of these, groupings I've made here, right? It could be potentially geometry might give you a certain, emotion. How would I know, right? So there can arrive emotions from all these kinds of experiences, right? And get back to this slide. There might be, as I said, feelings, emotion, desires. There might be something that you actually want to acquire, or when you have an experience of, if you see a nice car, for instance, you might get a desire to get that car, or at least get a car, maybe, right? See a beautiful, horse, you might say, well, I have a desire to get a horse. These kinds of things going on also in the consciousness, right? You might rationalize, okay, I have a desire to get a horse. How do I get a horse, right? Oh, there's a horse over there, I'm just going to grab it, right? Or are you saying, oh, I have to talk with the person who owns the horse? These are rationalizations, right? And reasonings and predictions and so on. They're in a sort of in a grouping by themselves. Rationalization, reasoning, and prediction. It might be. They need further clarification to be quite. But I'm putting words to it, right? So they're just pointing out that these things also going on, which are sort of based on this metaphysics, right? Interpretations, it's like, okay, I did this happened, how do I interpret what happened in regard to further reasoning, or, I have a feeling about it. What does that feeling, does it conform with my desire, my rationalization, so on, right? All sorts of shit going on, and you could possibly, add to the list here, right? Okay, so with this in mind, with this in consciousness, right, this structure of thinking here, I want to add a few comments and ideas to how I understand how analytic idealists or idealists approach this, right? And the analytic idealism is an extension of a problem, which is all this goings on I've described here, right? All this goings on doesn't tell you anything but what you have access to, right? You have access basically to colors and sounds and smells and feels and tastes and all the derivatives from it, right? So if we forget about the derivatives, because they are dependent on the qualia. If you didn't have the qualia, you didn't have all the derivatives, right? So when you look at the bare bone reduction base, which is the colors, the sounds, the smells, feels, and tastes, what is it about those colors that might make you think that there might be something beyond them? Is that all? Is there 5 colors and sounds, and the 5 senses, color, sound, smell? Is that all there is? If they're not all there is, there must be something beyond them, right? But why would I do that? This is sort of just philosophy. This is just reasoning. It's not based on my experiences, right? It's not based on, I can start to reason without a foundation in my reduction base. I can come up with reasonings. As I go down the levels of derivatives, I can sort of very easily lose connection with my reduction base. And that's the point I want to be very strict about. When you do this kind of metaphysics, or metaphysics in general, you need to make things hang together, so you can't just conjure up what you want, right? Because that's not good philosophy, in my opinion. So if you wind it back and say, there might be something beyond my experiences, that's imagination, right? Maybe that's a new category I need to add sometime, right? I imagine there might be something, right? But just because I can imagine it doesn't mean that it is the case, right? And just because I can decide for myself that it might be the case, it doesn't mean necessarily that it follows from the qualia, right? So my point is that if you are going to argue that there's something beyond your colors, or let's say the qualia, you have to do it axiomatically, which is a technique I have sort of clarified by saying you have to state it. I am working from it. It's part of my reasonings, right? I am working from it. I can't, it's not a derivative. It's something I'm working from. I'm adding something to the reasoning that is not following from the qualia. Because the problem is I've been, experiencing recently, or maybe I have for a long time, but I've been, focused on it recently, right? That when we're doing this deep level philosophy, people just come up with stuff. It's like, I need it to be the case, so therefore it just follows. As if it's, Bernardo Castrop says, all you have are your qualia, right? But obviously, there's something beyond my qualia. This kind of argumentation is freaking ridiculous, in my opinion, right? Because it alludes to a notion that it follows from the qualia, right? All that follows from the qualia, in my opinion, are cognitions and some other stuff that might be music and art, for instance, right? But maybe just music, right? I can't classify music other way. Maybe it's it's a third level that circumvents cognitions and taps into qualia directly, right? Or maybe it's just a feeling. Maybe it's just a feeling. Maybe I should get rid of it, right? Maybe it's just a feeling. When I hear that sound, I get a certain feeling. This kind of feeling I call music. Maybe that's just it, right? It might actually be a way to do it, right? So the second level is purely cognitions, and that might also make this picture way more, nicer and more symmetric and so on, right? Okay, so that's a part of doing philosophy. You can't just come up with something that is perfect in one go, right? It's a work in progress. Okay, so what I'm hearing, and I'm changing the slide here. What I'm hearing people like Bernardo Castrop do is saying, okay, all this I had in the first slide here, right? And adding these stuffs here, there was more to it on the second slide. Adding that to or looking at it and saying, this is mind. As I said, this goes on in my mind, so to say, right? I changed it to consciousness, but for a lack of a better term. Now, there's nothing particular dysfunctional in just labeling everything as mind. But then leave it there. It's just sort of a mega category, right? It's a category that just says all of it is this category, right? The problem is when he changes the category and saying, therefore everything is made of mind, right? Then he circumvents the qualia and says, now forget about the qualia. Now I'm going to tell you it's made of mind instead, right? And say that is the reduction base. So he is having some qualia, some cognitions, starting to have some abstractions and so on, ideas and reasonings, and then he comes up with mind in order to refer to all this stuff that are different categories, but lumping them all into one bag called mind. Fine. But then he makes the leap. He says, therefore everything is made of mind. And that is my reduction base, Bernardo Castrop, right? That's illegal. That doesn't work, right? Because you can't label something a category and then say it's made of that category, right? Just like you're saying, hey, that's a car. Therefore, that thing is made of car. Or that's an apple. That's why it's made of apple. Or that's an apple tree. Therefore, it's made of apple tree, right? That's an illegal step, in my opinion, right? That's bad thinking. That's bad logic, meta-logic, philosophy, whatever term you could put on it, right? And at the same time, he has an idea. This is maybe the worst of them all, right? He has an idea there might be something beyond his mind. And then he just says, well, that's also mind then. And I made this analogy before, like it's like me sitting here in my living room, and that's all I ever have access to, and I'm realizing that is all I will ever have access to. All that I have access to is my living room. There are colors, there are sounds, and whatever, right? Cognitions and derivatives and all this shit. But I then decide for myself one day, there might be something beyond my living room. No, just to cut it short. or to clarify, what I would saying is, okay, I think I will call all this my living room, right? I will call this living room. And then take this incredible leap and say, I guess everything is made of living room then, right? And some other day I will sit here thinking, gosh, there might be something beyond my living room. I can't get to it because I bump against these walls, so to say, right? Just to stay with the metaphor, right? What might that be? Well, I guess it's all living room out there, right? These kinds of leaps are completely unfounded. They're illegal leaps and they're unfounded leaps, right? And they're based on the idea that there's something beyond your mind, right? That you can't derive from the qualia. And because you can't go there and check, you have no way of saying what the hell it is. And saying it is mind is just to avoid dualism, right? Because if you say it's also mind, you don't have to bring in some new stuff, right? So you avoid the dualism problem, where you have to say, well, how does that come about, right? And what is that other stuff, right? Well, if you say it's all mind, then you have solved that problem linguistically, right? I don't buy any of this shit, right? I will always go back to this. What I have access to is my colors, my sounds, my smells, my feels, and my tastes. Now, you could maybe say that this is axiomatic. It's maybe you have to state it as some kind of action. Maybe it would be a definition rather. I don't know. What's the difference between axioms and definitions, and when does it need to be one thing and when does it need to be another thing? I'm not sure. But in my opinion, what we can all relate to in the end are colors, sounds, smells, feels, and taste. I can never get to whether somebody else has a color, a sound, a smell, feel, or taste. And I can never get to if it's the exact same experience we're referring to when we're communicating using language, which is another way of saying labeling particular kinds of sounds, right? These are abstraction. Maybe the language should be a category, right? Or an abstraction. A method maybe, right? Something like that. Language is down the line. It's not a part of the qualia, right? Because it's just sounds. Sounds that are interpreted in certain ways. So, what is the takeaway? Well, the takeaway is, in my opinion, the reduction base is the qualia. And everything else in your fucking philosophy has to be directly traceable back to those qualia in some kind of structure. Otherwise, I would think that you are cherry picking and you are out to get me and you're out to manipulate me and just connect the dots in a way that leads to whatever you want it to lead to, right? Because there's particular aspects of qualia and cognitions. You don't decide whether or not you experience a qualia, and you don't decide whether or not you're cognizing stuff, right? So there's a balance. When we get to the third level, the abstractions and geometry, then it becomes more and more something that is my consciousness adding to the picture, right? But qualia and cognitions, they arrive without my consent, you could say. I can maybe increase the likelihood that I'm going to, experience elephant by moving to some place where I expect there to be elephants. But I can't force the elephant as a part of my cognition within my qualia, right? And I like this to be the foundation, because if you're saying mind is the base, that is something that is purely artificial. A third level or maybe even fourth level derivative of your qualia that you're putting in as an explanation for qualia. So it's circular and it's bad reasoning and it's pulled out of your ass and there's all sorts of problems with it, right? I like this infinitely more, right? Because I am not in control of my colors and sounds and smells. I'm not in control of my conditions, right? So if there is an outside, the level to which I can say anything about it is somewhere in my colors or my cognitions. The rest I would categorize as something that I'm adding to the picture. So somewhere the link between me and a potential outside is among the qualia or the cognitions. Because my mind has evolved, apparently, evolution is a fourth level, right? A theory. So that I can, if there's an outside, right? Which is sort of a part of the idea of evolution, you could say, then the outside and the inside has to combine somehow, right? And the combination lies in the qualia and or in the cognitions. And I might say that qualia is actually the one that is closest to whatever might be outside if you decide axiomatically to have an outside, right? And then elephants, tomatoes, and human beings, and rivers, and arms, and so on. These are particular clarifications that is necessary for you to do all the other shit that you do. Emotions, and categories, and abstractions, and methods, and theories, and so on. You need to make those cognitions, right? So it's these steps that are sort of, you can maybe even say that these are an expression of evolution, right? There has been new levels added during evolution in order to get ahead, right? If you had an idea of geometry, maybe you were better at surviving, right? If you could cognize elephant rather than not cognize elephant, it would be advantageous. Whether or not there's actually something beyond yourself or beyond your consciousness or your mind, whatever term you want to put on it, is really not interesting. What is interesting, whether or not you cognize elephant, you could say, because that's what your mind has evolved to do, right? So this should be the foundation of your philosophy. This is the foundation of my philosophy. And I would, encourage you to, I shouldn't say that it should be the foundation of your philosophy. If you can come up with something that works for you, I would sort of say, go with it, right? If you feel inspired by this, fine. I'm not telling you what to do, right? This is how I do it, right? And I would say that you should come up with your own philosophy. You should come up with your own philosophy. Come up with some philosophy at least, right? And try to be as neutral as you possibly can. Don't consider anything, have some Cartesian doubt built in, right? And say, how did I get to that? Well, I don't know how I got to it. Then, put it on hold. Go deeper. Find something that is deeper and deeper and deeper. Maybe do the definition exercise I talked about, right? And you don't have to spell it out in language and so on. You can just do it in your mind, so to say, right? Which is usually much more easy than trying to, formulate it in a presentation like this, right? So I hope this is illuminating to you. I think it's a much better way of, I could go into various, I have an idea of what I call reality. I have ideas about memory and all sorts of, in connection with abstractions and cognitions and so on. It's a whole other story, right? This is sort of the bare bone structural approach to metaphysics that I'm trying to get across. And if you understand that, well, then I've done my job, right? And otherwise, please share, like, and subscribe. Consider a donation. Links below, and there are links to crypto donations on the board, and also link down below for the board. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.